So we're at the appointed hour. So let us all begin. You all get points for being early arrivals or on-time arrivals, and we want to respect that and your time too. But I think there's already a significant component of family, either by blood or connection over time, with this lovely scholarly leadership design, inspiring person that we're delighted to welcome to the Southwest Iowa Public Library. My name is Charles Stanhope. I'm on the board here, and I bring greetings to you from the staff, from the board, and among you, I'm sure, are supporters to this institution, and we're always looking for new if you're not. So please don't ever hesitate to inquire about how you might help us keep going what is loved in this town. It's the heart of the community, and we're proud of it being so. We raise 80% of our budget through fundraising, and another honest but important chunk from our endowment, and then the town is a contributor to about 18% of the operating budget or something like that. So I want to bring a couple of things to your attention before I spend a few minutes acquainting you with people you know, a person you all know much, much better than I am only getting to know. But I want to draw to your attention an upcoming program on November 1, place names of MDI in the Cranberry Islands. So let's see. Is this in person and online, just like tonight? So take a look at your calendars. It will be 5:30 on Tuesday, November 1. Place names of MDI in the Cranberry Islands. And then another pitch. If you're not already on our email list and you would like to be, when you're in the library transacting business, leave your name or email with the circulation desk. Amanda's over there to correct me if I say this wrong. But that way you can stay up to date, whether you're here or not, especially since in the positive result of these last 3 years we've been traveling through is Zoom. And we've all become familiar with Zoom and comfortable with Zoom more and more. And it certainly allows us to reach people that the fire marshal wouldn't allow us to have with us here tonight. And then too, if you really want to get, I have one more pitch and then I'm going to stop talking. We're just going to read this little bit about Libby so you can settle and focus on this wonderful woman and what she's accomplished and what in her life, as well as what she's accomplished with this absolutely beautiful book. If you would like to learn more about what's going on in the library and you have time in your busy schedules and you would like to volunteer, you can also stop by the circulation desk and they have an application for volunteers. We're always looking to grow the family of volunteers here, and we would appreciate your consideration of that. So on your behalf and on behalf of the library, we're delighted to welcome a native person who's like from around the corner. And it's just a thrill to have Libby Mills with us. And I'm just going to read a few paragraphs about her, which was in the press release, but I think it sets the stage for the context for what resulted in this beautiful book and the stories it brings to us all. So in the 19th century on the Maine coast, it was not uncommon for a merchant ship captain to bring his wife on extended voyages. Ellen Nellie Cutter Starrett sailed with her husband, Captain Henry A. Starrett, for 21 years, from 1863 to 1884, crossing the world's oceans while rearing their 2 children aboard ship. Anne and Frank, I should not have stopped, on shipboard. Nellie's exquisitely detailed diary, kept during her first 2 years at sea, records both the tedium and the excitement of her daily life on the ship T.J. Southern. And when you live this story through the book and you turn the pages and it says Ecuador, Acapulco, Rangoon, it's amazing to think about the middle of the 19th century and this couple and their family traveling so far and wide and always landing back in Belfast, Maine. Libby Mills, great-granddaughter of Nellie Starrett, grew up in Belfast, in the house where her great-grandparents settled after living at sea for 21 years. If this is not a family story for a motion picture, I don't know what it is. In this setting, meaning the house in Belfast, surrounded by mementos of family adventures, Libby absorbed the stories and their history. She went on to graduate from Oberlin College. I'm not going to say the year. A year later, she married her childhood flame, Bob Mills, a Southwest Harbor native. Their lives and the towns were all intertwined, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful story. They taught together at the Putney School in Vermont for many years, and I've heard Putney School conversations going on earlier this evening as people arrived. Through it all, Libby kept her attachment to the Maine coast, living part of the year in a rustic cabin on Swans Island and sailing the coast with Bob, a blue water sailor himself. And I'm not going to read these parts because I think she may have embedded these sentiments in what she wants to share with you herself. I just want to say the time that I've had to live in those pages in anticipation of Libby's arrival has just piqued my curiosity about living in and with that book for some time to come. It's a perfect book to pick up and put down because of the way the journal entries are displayed. I went through, when you learn the story, you learn that Nellie was very well schooled in church affairs and business and belief. So I went to look for Christmas, a couple of Christmases they were on scene. What did she say about Christmas and New Year's? And then of course Easter moves all over the place. So I wasn't able to calculate when the Easters would have been in those years. But I think you'll find many wonderful reasons beyond just learning their story to spend time in this book. For many enjoyable and informative hours ahead. So without any more ado from this talker, trustee guy, welcome please warmly, Libby Mills.
Thank you for being here. All these relatives and old friends from Putney and relatives from the Southwest, it's just wonderful. And thank you all for coming out on a stormy night and listen to this story of the 150 years past. I'd like to start tonight though with a thanks to the library itself. The library now, as it is, just lively and just bursting with energy in here and always welcoming. But I also want to put out a word of thanks for the library as it was in 1941. In 1941, as Charlie has just said, my high school, it wasn't high school, it was a summer camp flame. Bob lived way down in the end of Clark Point Road, where the road meets the water, with that house that looks out over everything. So he went to school, elementary school, in the yellow house, in the yellow building that is now the Harbor House. That was the elementary school. So when he was probably 10 or 11, Bob kept a diary, and it surfaced in his late life, to the great amusement of a lot of us. He kept it regularly, very regularly, for at least 2.5 weeks. Beginning on January 1st. And like Nellie's, it was diligent, it was repetitious, it was very regular. And this is about what it said. Got up. Went to school. That meant walked to school, no school buses in those days. Went to the library, came home, read. Day 2. Got up. Went to school. Really, for days in a row, that's what he entered in his diary. And of course it makes me laugh, but you know, Bob turned into a very serious reader and a thoughtful reader. His favorite authors were E.B. White, Wendell Berry, and Joshua Slocum. And he was a witty writer as well. And I just cannot imagine that that path would not have been open to him had he not spent those afternoons in the library. I just am convinced that that really was the key to that wide world out there. So for the people who were running the library when it looked like that, I say thanks wherever you are. It's not here, but we are here in this very same room that he was in. Isn't that amazing and wonderful? So here we are. But we're here to talk about a different diary. And the diary that we're talking about is this one that Charlie has just talked about. And I'll try to tell you a little bit about it, but without, they say that sailing is 99% tedium and 1% terror. So I'll hope that this is not 99% tedium. Because the danger of being tedious about this is right there. I wanted to say, I'd like to answer some of the questions that people ask me a lot about it. One, and they are something about, how did you ever get to do this? Where did you find that diary? And as Charlie just said, he really did it well. I should just let him keep going.
I didn't want to give away any of your glory.
So when Nellie and Henry came home for sea in 1984 for good, their kids were then in their teens. They bought that great, it isn't a great big house. It's a big house in Belfast that was for sale at that time. It was not an old house then. It had been built in 1848. It was about 20 years old when they bought it. They came home, of course, with everything they owned, they would have brought home. The fact is, most of the things they owned were either built into the ship or screwed to the floor.
Yeah.
So what they brought home were the tools of the trade. That would be the barometer, the sextant, a great chest of charts in the attic that would show every voyage they'd taken, all marked out. And there was a sailor's palm, a marlin spike. There were the mementos. There was, I remember, a city map of Liverpool, just lots of what I call claptrap was just around the house. A lot of the things were in the attic, but a lot of it was right down there in the living space. The wall, the oil paintings on the wall of the ships that he had commanded, a magnificent model, maybe this long, of the Frank-N-Thayer, which he was on for 7 years, and did a model with, he carved the ivory blocks and the belaying pins, the wheel, were all hand carved by him. So he was a pretty good woodworker and carver. But it was that mix of business things, of everyday things, of real treasures. The ship model is a treasure. It's in the Searsport Museum now. So those are the things that they brought back with them. The house stayed in the family for 5 generations. People came, people went. They were extended family. The old people moved in. They died there, and their things went up in the attic, and it just went on. We could go on and see a picture of that house, Kate. This is a wonderful picture of Bob. There he is. But let's get to the house. There we are. So all those things went to the attic, and by the time we got there, it was quite a collection. My grandmother lived still downstairs. We lived in the upstairs of the house. It was not divided into apartments. There were rooms there were just a lot of rooms. My grandmother lived downstairs and she loved children and was wonderful about taking time to play games with us, and she used to braid my hair. She was the one who, she was a nurturing person. But the thing she did best was to tell us stories of what it was like growing up on shipboard. So anyway, we just absorbed all that information. It wasn't that we were there. It was just that, it wasn't that we did anything. You just lived in it. And that was the diary was all part of that. So the diary, I did not find the diary until I was about in my 60s. It had been up in the attic. They brought it, my mother brought it down and had read it a little bit. By then she was in her 80s and her eyesight had not failed, but it wasn't very good. And she couldn't read that writing any longer. So I took it on myself to read it to her. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting. And at that time, women's history was just beginning to be a pretty interesting topic. And along the Maine coast, particularly, the anything that a woman who'd been on a boat and wrote about was really hot stuff. So that was, I thought, this maybe this diary is special. I went to Mystic and looked at their collection of women's diaries. I looked at Mystic, at the Bath Museum has a great library. Looked there, Searsport, of course, and it didn't seem to me that there was anything in any of those libraries that came close to the detail and the quality of writing and the quality of the regularity that Nellie had put into it. So that was when I first began to think seriously of doing something with this diary. That was 25 years ago, and that's how long it's taken to do it. It took me longer to put the book together than they spent years on sea. So who won and who lost in that one? Anyway, that's where the diary came from. So let's talk about Nellie for a little bit. Can we get Nellie up there? There she is. Polly, stand up and put on her hat.
They're not my hats.
These are the things that
I have a trunk of them if anybody needs a hat.
this came from the Belfast house in the trunk.
She's so teeny. Everything she has is so teeny.
Can you do that one more time?
That would have
Just
been
stand
from
up
her
and
old
show it.
age.
Where do you want me to look?
Right here. Yeah. Can you come a little closer? Thank you.
There's a lot of feathers. You can understand the bird problem.
Thank you.
There was a trunk of clothes up there that we think we know who they belong to anyway. So Nellie was not very big. She weighed in the diary at 99 pounds and at her heaviest was 113. Henry was not much bigger. He weighed in at his heaviest at 133. So these two people he was in charge of the ship. My goodness, he was a tiny little guy, but to be in charge of that big boat. Nellie was born in Warren. She moved to Belfast in her childhood. She was not, she did not come from a sophisticated background. I will say that her father's family they really had a history. They seemed to care about the education of women. And I know that from the fact that Nellie's aunt, who grew up in Portland. I should say that Nellie's grandfather was a prominent citizen of Portland in the 1800s, in the middle 1800s. In fact, he was mayor and lived in one of those big brick houses down on near the museum. Those little girls in his family went to the Mrs. Martin School. And the Mrs. Martin School, I think, was a proper school for little girls to go to. They learned embroidery. They were good at that. We had some of that. The son, Nellie's father, went to Bowdoin. He was in a class with Henry Wadsworth Longfellow and Nathaniel Hawthorne, if you want to put him in historical context. And then he went on to Andover Theological School to be a minister. So he was a minister at Warren when Nellie was born, and then came to Belfast to be at the North Church Congregational in the 1840s, I think it was about then. So that family really cared about education. The mother's, Nellie's maternal grandparents, I don't know as much about. They were shipbuilders in Thomaston, and I do know that grandmother turned into a powerhouse. She was, you could write a book about her, but that will be in my next life. Nellie was very religious. She was Protestant, but more than that, she was Congregationalist, and her father was solemn. She was, the family was close. There for the next life, there's a shoebox full of letters written back and forth among those family members, all on onion skin. Somebody with good eyes can tackle those. So it was a family of writers and presumably of readers. And I just have to imagine that Nellie's spelling and context, it just seemed as though she must have had some writing lessons along the way, but who would have done that is a question. Maybe they had really good public schools in Belfast and Warren. Isn't that a nice thing to think? So the thing that stands out, there are lots of things that stand out about it, but I guess I should also ask how Nellie and Henry met. Did they know each other in Warren? They were kids there together, but he was 5 years older, and why would he be interested in this little girl? But somehow they got together, and the close relationship between between the minister and his wife, shows in this letter that Henry, the father, the father is writing to his about to be son-in-law. It says, "My dear Henry, I have just heard from Mrs. Cutter," that's his wife. No first names around here. "Mrs. Cutter, that my dear Ellen has decided to accept your proposal and will before many months link her destiny with yours in those bonds which death alone can sunder. I have full confidence in her sound judgment and shall not withhold my approval and blessing. You may well be proud of your choice, for a dearer, kinder, truer-hearted child never blessed a father, and she, who has been so exemplary a daughter, cannot fail to be an exemplary wife. You may regard it as no slight confidence that I am willing to entrust her to your hands. I rejoice that I am not called to do it with a stranger, whose education and character and principles I know but little, for I know you to have been trained in the love of the Bible and under the influence of the family altar. And I know you to have been a kind, affectionate son and brother, and this assures me that you will be a kind, indulgent husband to my dear E." And he did not go away. He stayed and he married her. His father-in-law did not frighten him away. But I do think that shows, it shows pretty much the tenor of the family and the thought patterns of the family. And so they were married.
They were married on, they were married less than a month after that letter was written. That letter was written on May 1st and the marriage was on May 26th.
Wow.
And now Nellie gets to finally speak for herself. She writes, this is the first entry in the diary. She writes, Tuesday, May 26, 1863. Pleasant, mild day, slight shower in the morning. Busy all day doing the last few things. Sarah Bailey came in the afternoon to braid Mary and Carrie's hair. Fanny McClellan came after tea and put on my veil and wreath. Soon after, Horace and George came at 8:30 p.m. I was married to H.A.S. by my father before a room of my young friends. A very pleasant wedding, everyone said. Isn't that great? We've known weddings that were more complicated. They went then on a wedding trip on she writes about being all going down to the Steamboat Wharf, and we don't know just where the Steamboat Wharf was in Belfast. And they got onto the boat, went to Rockland, went to Portland, spent the night in Portland and stayed a few days, visited with friends, lots of visiting with friends, on to Boston to visit with friends and other family. And then they ended up in New York City where they were due to meet the ship. So, and does it surprise you that Nellie's mother and father also appeared in New York City to meet the ship with them? So that's how it all began. That's the land part of the story. The diary, it's really nice. I'd like to know where they were in New York. I know they were in Lower Manhattan, whether the TJ Southard was in the East River or the Hudson, it's hard to tell except by what you know with the addresses that they're using. I pretty much think she was down by the South Street Museum and that part of the shipping world. But they were ready to meet the ship, and maybe we could talk now about the ship itself. Can we get out there she is. That's the TJ Southard. That's a shadow box model carved. It's the property of the Maine Maritime Museum in Bath. They gave me that picture to use. That she was 187 feet long, if that means anything to you. It didn't mean anything to me, so I looked up the length of the Victory chimes, which is pretty big. The Victory chimes is 127 feet, so this is about a third bigger than that. It's considerably beanier, which would have to be to accommodate just for proportions. It's a true ship, and if you hang around with shipping people, you learn that ships are ships and barks and brigantines are brigantines, and that a ship has to be at least three-masted. It has to be square rigged, so that four main and mizzen mast. It has the appropriate jibs and staysails, and it does have one fore-aft sail back here, the stagger. So that is what this ship has. I'd like to know what this flag, picked out this flag. I have no idea what that flag is. If anybody here knows much about ships and knows what how to read those flags, I'd like to know it. So she's a downeaster. She has a clipper bow, but the downeasters were beamier. They had a bigger belly. The downeasters, the clippers were faster. The downeasters carried more cargo. These guys were the truckers of the day. They were just built to carry cargo from one place to another. And they had to sacrifice speed to get the coal where it was going. I don't know what else to say about this ship right now. The accommodations are interesting. I think if I read this right, those little white spaces back there would be the quarter deck, and that would be where the captain lived with his family.
Libby, do you know where it was built? Do you know where it was built?
It was, I meant to say that. It was built in Richmond. And it was Richmond, in case you don't know where Richmond is, it's about halfway up the Kennebec between Bath and Augusta.
Yeah.
And it was built by T.J. Southard, was a big name in Richmond. And it was T.J. Southard's yard, named for him. I mean, so the ship is named for him. It's nice to drive through Richmond now, and you can see where the Southard yard was. And I bet if you really worked at it, you could find out which of those big houses was T.J. Southard's own house. The museum, the back museum has it's not a full-scale model, but it's a bust of T.J. Southard. He was a determined man. You wouldn't want to tangle with him, and my grandfather tangled with him. He was good.
Do you know how many crew it took to keep that ship going? How large the crew would be?
I can, sorry, this
How-
is going to be my
Let's bring it
interpreter.
into action. I am Libby's Goodyear.
Yeah, this is my ears.
How big is the crew? Do you know?
How big is the crew? That's, the manifest that would tell that is gone. So I do not know exactly, but I've asked lots of people who know this history, and they would say that would have been about 20 people on board. It would have, but I can tell you that the people who were in the people that Nellie was allowed to be with was so limited. She was allowed to be with these are the people who she would eat with. Those are the only people she could be with. Her husband, the first maid, possibly the second maid. Her maid, they brought, I believe she was married to the steward, but a woman, her name was Mary. Mary was okay. She could talk to the cook, and that may be it. And there she was just on this is 2 years worth. Those are the people that she was allowed to be with. She was allowed to walk. She walks a lot. I mean, she writes a lot about walking anyway. I don't know what that means. She promenades. She does not walk. She promenades. She promenades the quarter deck. So the quarter deck is, as you probably know, is the raised deck at the stern. Yeah, you can see that. And that's where they live. So she's allowed to go about that far. She's not allowed to go down those other steps down to the main deck. She cannot be with the sailors. That's not proper. Proper is big. That's an important word
Libby, what
in
was
these
the
days.
cargo? You know what the cargo was?
I do know that I know what the cargoes, I know what most of the cargoes were. At this point, the first part is they're carrying coal from New York City around Cape Horn to Acapulco. That's their first trip. I just wanted to add that the main cabin was pretty fancy. They had carpets and when they're in port, they had carpets and curtains and I think pretty comfortable furniture. When they went to see all the carpets and the carpets went up and the curtains came down and it was pretty bare. The where they went. Let's talk about where they went. We have the world map up here. Maybe you can, I don't know whether you can see this or not. I'll try to point it out. They starting here in New York. They go around, come and look at this afterwards. I would just like to say a word about these maps that my friend Kath Martin, who is actually taking the rain barrels down from my cabin on Swans Island this very day, is both a sailor and a surveyor. And she got really interested in this and on this photograph map, which happened to be among the relics of the Belfast attic. She took the fix from every single day in the diary, plotted it on the map and connected the route.
Wow.
So that course is as accurate as it can possibly be.
Wow.
And Kath and if she is nothing if not accurate. So it's really worth looking at. So on this first trip, they're going to go all the way over here. They go almost to Africa and then down to around, and you can see in the, is this one? Yeah, you can see they had a terrible time going around Cape Horn.
You're beating in here.
They're beating and getting beaten back and having a rough time. So
That's a
there
close
it is. Can you, does that show, can you see that from a distance? It really shows how they were, she writes about, well, I'll read you some diary pieces, but they read it, she writes about how discouraging it is. So they went from New York to Acapulco with coal, from Acapulco to the Chincha Islands, which are, the Chincha Islands are in Lima, Peru, down in here. And then around Cape Horn again, up and through the English Channel to Brussels and Antwerp, not Brussels, Antwerp, around the Horn of Africa, all the way over here to Rangoon and down to Singapore. So that was during the time of the period of the diary.
You know what they were carrying then?
I do. I can tell you what they're carrying in different places. And I only know from reading the diary. I don't have any access to the business papers. They're gone. I think they're gone. We never found them. So Acapulco, from Acapulco to the Chincha Islands, they went in ballast. They write about taking on ballast in Acapulco. They, of course, would rather be carrying something, but if there's no cargo to go, then you just throw rocks in the bottom of the boat. You have to have something, you have to have a lot of weight down there to counteract the height of those masts. From the Chincha Islands to Antwerp, that's 3.5 months. It was 5 months from New York to Acapulco, 2 months from Acapulco to the Chincha Islands, 3.5 months from the Chincha Islands to Antwerp. And that was a memorable voyage. In the Chincha Islands, they took on a load of guano. And if you live near Southwest Harbor, you know what guano is. and the idea of being in port, having your ship loaded with guano and the dust flying.
Oh, yeah.
And then it is hard to imagine how you,
Islands is right in this area of South America.
Yeah.
Looking for the Chincha Islands. Yeah. The Chincha Islands are off Lima. They're up in, I'm lost.
Okay, Kate, do you have the other one that was the feeder?
Here are the
Oh,
Chincha
there.
Islands.
the Chincha Islands are small and they would not be important if they had not been, if they had not been discovered to be probably, if not miles, just, you can't imagine how thick it was. It was the droppings of those birds for ever and ever and ever. And it must have been thousands of feet deep. So
Major source
I'd like to talk about that because they had a long, I'll show you what happened in the Chincha Islands. But let's go on to Antwerp to Rangoon was 4 months, and Rangoon, that was again a questionable cargo. They had a hard time finding a cargo to go from Antwerp to Rangoon. And then Rangoon to Singapore was easy. They filled up with rice and went down. That was only 3 weeks long. So we could talk about what she did at sea. Maybe you'd rather just go listen to the diary. It's pretty interesting.
You want to talk about the moss?
Oh, I want to talk about, okay, we can talk about the moss right now. That's a good thing. Do you have, here's what happened in the Chincha Islands. And please remember that the Chincha Islands it was a great meeting place for lots of ships. So there were lots of American ships. The ladies, many of them were captains and their wives. The ladies gathered under the awnings and made these exquisite decorations with the sea mosses. The men on the board, not the officers, of course, not the captain, but the seamen were loading the boat. And on the islands, the story of that is a story of social justice. They were virtually slaves of either Native South Americans or Asians that were brought over as in virtually slave conditions, who spent their lives shoveling guano until they couldn't shovel it any longer. So there's a real thing of colonial power in there. But this is what happened, what the women did anyway. This was an extraordinary piece. I have all these, we own them and they're in the family. This is about, I don't know the size of, this probably is about this size. And that's sea mosses that are just, they are not glued, they're just stuck on their own. They're not sewn? Is my belief.
There's no sewing, there's no stitching?
They're gelled. They're like, I believe they're not, there's no adhesive, no unnatural adhesive sticking them on. But let's go on and see. This is there are some that are really botanical specimens that are just one thing that is put on a piece of paper and with another one glued on top or put on top and put under presses. So these I believe, these look like rosebuds, don't they look like rosebuds? I always thought they were rosebuds, and now I look at them and I think maybe not, maybe these are the fruiting bodies of these pieces. The size of each of these is pretty close to, in the book, they're smaller than a postcard, but not much smaller than a postcard. They're a reasonable size. And they must have just worked over there with needles to get them, get those little branches in place.
Like felting,
Hmm?
kind of like felting.
Kind of like felting,
What?
was it like felting?
It would be a little bit like felting, maybe, yeah. I mean, with felting, you're trying to raise up the, we have a wool connection here.
Did they wear these wreaths?
In felting, you're trying to raise a nap, but in this, I think you're just trying to arrange something that will stick to the paper. I think it was a little bit of a hobby for Victorian
Sure.
women.
Sure.
This, in the house, there was a second volume of this that was of dried seaweeds that was made on the North Shore of Boston. So I think these were, I think it was a kind of a hobby of the time.
Were they pressed, Libby?
Yeah, they must have been, oh, they had to be pressed. Yes, they had to be pressed. Yeah, because they're absolutely flat. They are really like pressed. They appear to be like pressed specimens in a botanical collection. Yeah.
Libby, we used to do that when I was a little girl. And
Did that as a little girl? Who's talking?
yes, I'm Sue Arapat, I'm on the
It's a
computer.
Zoomer. Oh, it's a Zoomer. Oh.
Yeah. But the way you do that is you take a piece of paper and set it in a pan of water, and then you put the seaweed on top of it and very carefully lift it out of the water. So that's why it stays perfectly flat on there. There's really no pressing required. It just stays
Oh,
there.
it just sits.
And somewhat accidental, but you could, you can manipulate it a little bit.
Oh, that's really good. That's nice to know.
It's fun to do.
Can you identify who that person
That is Sue Arapach,
Yeah,
local artist.
Thank you.
thank
So
you.
So that's really the answer, that you just let it, yeah, you put it on the paper and let it take its place and then arrange it and let it
You
sit.
probably had to
So-
spread it.
Are you still there?
Sue?
No, she's. gone.
Yes, I am.
Here, there,
Yeah,
here she is, she's here.
Yes.
yeah, you're still there. Then how long does it take to dry, and does it stay there? How many centuries is that going to stay on?
Well, probably the last one I did was about 50 years ago, and I found them when our parents died. So they've already lasted 50 years.
They've already lasted 50. Did you say 50?
Yeah.
50,
That's
yeah.
good.
They
that's
last
good.
as long as
Well, these were
paper.
done in 1863, so they're 3 times longer. So hang in. That's very good.
There's another question.
On the other, when the fourth day, there was the
The
tag.
fourth,
What?
On the
Just a
flat
second.
eagle.
This
On
one.
the eagle.
Yeah, the eagle?
On
The eagle,
the
yeah.
eagle. What does it say?
Oh, back to the eagle.
what does this say, Libby, you know?
Oh, it, yeah.
Made in Japan.
Sure you got the same name in China.
I should know what it says.
I can't quite tell.
I can't make that out. And I should know and I can't
Kate,
remember.
Kate's on it. She's
Oh,
gonna-
Kate's on it. Yeah, find it in the book. I'll find it in the book.
Curious.
It's in-
Yeah.
I just want to let you all know, if you're all
It's in the
comfortable,
back.
in order to facilitate talking with Libby,
Yeah,
please take your masks off. She can probably hear you better if you just do that and then remask if that's your
Wow.
preference.
Can
But I
you
don't
read it?
want you to feel uncomfortable, and I want to facilitate it for our wonderful speaker as well. And I want to hear from
Oh,
the diary.
this, the bottom is
Yeah, it says
Chincha Island, Chincha Island is the bottom of it.
Made of something,
Moss.
made of moss.
Oh, is it made, say
Made
made
of
of moss and
moss.
the Chincha Islands?
Yeah,
Something
taken,
like-
here we go, made of moss, taken at the Chincha Islands, Peru.
Yeah, there we go. There we go. Doesn't say made in
There you go, Edie.
Good.
Just to think of that name.
Are there any other questions right here?
You want to hear some entries from the diary.
Well, I wanted to read, it's just, there are wonderful pieces in the diary that I really wanted to read you. The changes that they have, the changes in weather and conditions. She starts out and it's almost like a cruise. They are I never read you the piece that says the last piece that she wrote was, as they left New York, was the hills of Navesink bear 15 degrees northwest, distance 10 miles, the only land in sight. And I think she's not going to see any land again until she sees Tierra del Fuego, and she doesn't. But she has a nice time. A month after that, you would think you're on some fancy cruise boat, something that might come to Bar Harbor. And listen to this weather. And doesn't this sound, wouldn't you pay $3,000 a day to do this? She says, pleasant and very warm. On deck a while in the morning, played 2 games of chess, won both. Think I am improved fast. She's just learned to play chess and she's beating her husband. Mended my dress, which I tore last night on deck. Sun directly overhead today with no wind, decidedly warm. Days growing short very fast. Played 3 games of chess in the afternoon, sitting by the forward cabin door where it was cool. Henry beat twice and I once. Then I came in and crocheted until supper time while he read aloud. I mean, isn't that lovely? Doesn't that sound like a honeymoon cruise? After supper, changed my dress and promenaded the quarterdeck a little while. The remainder of the evening spent on the sofa, very light wind. And the next day is just as nice. Bright, pleasant day, quite a breeze. Ship going 6 knots, tore off my pillowcases, made 1. Mary and somebody else tried to drive out the flies who have increased altogether too fast for comfort. Did not succeed very well, as they much preferred remaining in to going out to be blown away by the wind. Sensible creatures. Been out 4 weeks, or rather 27 days. Such light winds most of the time have not made much a long passage in our present prospect. Have a nice white oak yardstick the carpenter made for me yesterday. On deck a short time after tea, such a breeze could not walk very much. And she gives the latitude 19 degrees 24 north. They're still north of the equator. And longitude 42.19. So there they are. And then, but then let's go to the next month. And they are, this is September 13th. And she writes, clear, cold day. Henry on deck most of the day, saw land about 2 p.m. Supposed to be the eastern coast of Tierra del Fuego. I read most of the day, did not go on deck until nearly 5 p.m. Long range of land to be seen about 10 miles distant. It consisted mostly of high, bold cliffs capped with snow. Water very green, good breeze, ship going 10 knots. Intended going through the Strait of Le Maire, but not making it before dark, decided to go around Staten Island. Squally in the night, after being out of sight of land for 81 days. Not much satisfaction in seeing such a desolate region as was in sight today. Worked longitude for Henry. And she's in 53 degrees south latitude now. But look, she goes, that's the 11th, that's the 13th of September. And for the next 2 weeks, they are just getting battered around Cape Horn. And I'd like to read some of these because the cruise, the honeymoon cruise has turned. It's different. Let's go to, how many in this room are sailors? Are there some sailors here? I know of a few. Well, you will really appreciate this. I read this and I think about what she's going through in the cabin and what the sailors at the top of that mast are getting whipped around. They're the ones who are really, really in it. Here's the beginning. Friday, September 18th, all kinds of weather, sunshine, rain, snow, hail, and strong wind, northwest by west. Ship rolling heavily, sea washing over constantly, sewed most of the day. Mary fell against the spar on deck coming from the galley with the supper, bruised her leg. H, that's Henry. She stopped calling him Henry. She just says H. H attempted to, what's the choice? H attempted to read aloud in the evening, but a sea washed over the house, giving us a little water in our room. A disagreeable day, truly. Ate a slice of wedding cake to commemorate the passage round Cape Horn, which we passed yesterday, 85 days out. Barometer down to 28.6. So that's the beginning of it. And it goes on for a few more days. This is only 3 days later. Clouds and sunshine, very heavy sea, ship rolling very much. Coal shifted some between the decks. Decanters rolled out of their places in the pantry over the cabin floor, breaking one. Candlesticks and everything on top of the secretary went under the bed. A moving time generally. Read what I could. A great call for oil clothes, so wet on deck all the time. Galley washed out several times. Mr. Finch thrown over the wheel, hitting his head against the bit, making quite a bump. I assume she means a bump to his head. Ship laid to in the night, could not have enough sail on to steer. The latitude is now 56 degrees south. They're going south and south. I'm going to skip a few days. And here's it could be scary. Pleasant morning, very heavy sea, not so much wind either. Cloudy afternoon and wet. Heavy sea came over the lee rail about noon, breaking some of the rail and washing one of the men down under the lee scuppers, taking his hat overboard. I bet he remembers that. A sea coming over last night knocked the mate down. A great deal of motion today. Hard work to eat our meals in peace. I received the contents of Henry's tumbler of water on my dress. Fortunate it was nothing worse. Sewed most of the day, read some. I see I have written that the sea came over the lee rail, but it was the weather one. And in addition to breaking the rail, the harness cask was broken in and the lower steps of the stairs leading on to the forward house were washed away, as well as the several other like accidents. They're down to 58 degrees, 29 minutes. They're really down there. And then maybe this would be the last one to go because it is getting hard. We don't want to be too tedious down here. This is the 26th of September. They are now, we started on the 3rd. This is almost 2 weeks of day after day after day after day of that weather. Sun shone a while this morning, but afternoon brought another gale of wind, shaking the old ship well. shook me out of my chair a few minutes ago, have been making easting today. Imagine it, they're making easting. That means they're getting blown back. They're trying to go west. Wind and current against us. This is truly a hard road to travel. That's interesting because that picks up the Civil War, the history of the time. Didn't a hard road to travel, how is that tied in with the Underground Railroad and it comes from that period. So she knew what that, I was surprised that she knew that phrase. And no mistake, the captain looks blue enough, no doubt. If we have a long passage with some, it will be owing to his having his wife with him and wages by the month. Just as though a ship could sail without wind or with it dead ahead and make a quick passage. H built a platform for my trunk this morning, so now there is several inches from the floor and cannot get wet if water does come in. Have as yet had nothing wet, though the water has been around the trunks several times. Nothing spotted but gloves. Read some and sewed a little. H sold about $60 worth of clothes to the sailors today. Snowed about an hour early this morning and again this afternoon. Wet and dismal on deck. Men must be wet all the time, water in the forecastle and water on the deck. About tea time, a tremendous sea came over the lee rail, breaking in one of the pantry windows and also the outside cabin door on the starboard side, letting a little young sea into the cabin. I had just left the forward cabin door to get H a dry coat, or I should probably have gotten wet. Mary was in the pantry and was well drenched. It was nearly an hour before the water was all bailed out. Very little came into the after cabin. Wind came around before night, southwest, and kept so until 4 a.m. No observation. So, what to me is interesting is that she does not, I think that's enough of Cape Horn. She does not express fear. She sews a lot. And sometimes I think about when I'm scared, I go to my knitting and knit fast. And maybe she goes to her sewing and sews fast. That I wonder how she dealt with that. She certainly didn't talk about it. So I don't know how, I think we maybe could call it and have some time for questions. I would like to read this letter. This diary ends fast, and it ends fast because the baby came fast. That I'd like to think that my great-grandmother became pregnant, my grandmother, let's put it a different way. I'd like to think that my grandmother was conceived in Paris, because they did a little trip to Paris when they were hung up in Antwerp. And I keep counting on my fingers to say, doesn't that make 9 months? But she did have the baby, and she did have it in Singapore. And her parents did not know she was going to have a baby. So the proud daddy writes, 2 days after the birth, she writes, since Nellie finished the last sheet, she has presented me with a little daughter. To commence with, she was sick but a short time and is now nicely. The child most 3 days old, as it was born on the 26th at 8:30 p.m. Don't know if this surprises you much, for in some way, I think you may have mistrusted it. No one was ever more opposed to having a child than we while so far away from home. Notwithstanding, I think it would take considerable of a sum now to induce E to part with it, and I am sure it would me. So that's why the diary ended. So questions? I think we've had a conversation all the way through. So that's it. Yes.
Were you editing
I'm gonna let him finish his sentence.
were you editing the diary when you made it into a book?
Did you edit the diary as you?
Oh, absolutely not. No, the diary as it's printed is, we spent so much time proofing it I wanted punctuation to be correct, that italics all had to be in the right place, the shift and it is absolutely, and I addressed that there were places where you just could not understand the writing or the word didn't make sense, and that's noted, but it's an absolute transact. And I didn't also say that the whole book is meant to be, I could have talked about that. The whole book is meant to replicate the original diary as much as I could. It is a beautiful book. It's navy blue with a kind of a pebbly leather surface embossed with gold. This is the photograph of the cover. This is the photograph of the spine and the photograph of the back. Of course, the text had to be changed to make this the title page. But we replicated the form of the diary in the quarto form as it was originally. Picked a font that was similar to the font in the printed diary. Even found a paper that was similar in feel and color to that. We worked hard at that. The editor and publisher of this book is Stephen Steinauer of Steinauer Editions, and I just can't say he did such an incredibly good job on it. He had 25 years to do it. He didn't either. He only had about 10.
Yes.
Is there anything in any of the diaries that would reflect her knowledge of the Civil War going on? It almost seems like it's totally divorced. They're on the boat, they're out of the ocean, and here's the Civil War going on.
The Civil War is definitely going on. And I might have talked about that too. She talks about it. The one time, there were so many questions. In the first place, I don't know why Henry was not in the army. Why? How did he get out? He was 30 years old. He must have been subject to the draft, and maybe as a sea captain he was excused. I don't know. She is definitely aware of it. She's quite her social conscience is right on this. That she worries that Lincoln is not has not gotten elected. She speaks of that. She says it has been 4 months since I've seen a newspaper. She doesn't know what's going on. She writes to her friend as she's coming into Antwerp. She's writing a letter home and about the Civil War, about some relative who is in prison in Andersonville. And then she says, oh, but maybe the war is over now. And so she's the one time that they really come into anywhere near close to it is coming down. It was just before that little section I read about when it sounds so dreamy and paradisical. There was they thought they were being attacked by a privateer, and they were able to change their course quickly and scoot away. But they were quite sure that it was a privateer. But the politics of the day do not escape her. She just doesn't have any way to keep up. It's not. She's abolitionist by, I think, probably by religion. I think that was probably part of the church. It's a good question. I wish I knew more about that.
Libby, a couple of questions about your growing up in that house. You wrote in the beautiful introductory essay about the narration of your family being there and your family living there, and you talk about playing sardines in the dark closet.
Oh, yeah.
What is playing sardines in the dark closet?
You mean you never played sardines?
Turn off the light.
Yeah, we play sardines.
Is it,
And
it's the opposite of
we should all get up and play sardines. Just the right size. When you play sardines, it's like hide and seek, and one person goes and hides, and then when you find that person, you jump in with them. And everybody
The
is.
crew diminishes and then you have to find, the last person has to find where you all are.
Yeah,
Yes.
Okay.
but
You squash
have,
everybody and then the last person has to.
That's
find
right.
everybody.
The last person
Yeah.
to find them is it the next time.
so.
But if you live in a house that has great big, there was one closet that had, I mean, none of the closets had any lights in them. I don't know why we'd call that one the dark closet. They're all dark closets. Anyway, there was one closet in the house that was called the dark closet. So that was a great place to hide when you were playing sardines. There were a lot of good places to hide in that house.
Charles, did you have one more?
Yes, and as a librarian, I have to ask you, you've read many entries where Nellie is reading, finds a time for reading. Do you have any sense of what she might have been reading?
What you might have been reading, oh boy, I have a reading list of what they did. It was,
It's not in the book.
no, I mean,
Oh my
I
God,
just,
don't get going back.
I just,
It's
I
been
just
25
compiled
years.
it. I can
Do
tell
you have
you,
any idea what this was like?
they read pretty heavy stuff. They read a lot of it was religious. They read the history of Christianity, both volumes. They read the life of Napoleon, the history of the United States, Lady Wortley's travels in the United States. They read out loud to
I
each
love
other
that part.
Darwin's Origin of Species.
Oh, my God.
And it was 4 years off the press when they read that
Yeah.
book. She studied French. That was knowing hoping they'd go to Paris and get pregnant.
Thank you. Thank you for this wonderful masterpiece of a book.
Dale,
Did it take 25 years to write because you had to translate the old cursive?
Did it take 25 years to translate the old cursive into this kind of thing?
Yeah, I don't know how many, yes, I guess so. It took a long time. I mean, it was actually a pleasure to do that. And I did transcribe the entire thing. My beloved cousin Ernie, rest in peace, gave me the Dragon when it was fresh out. So that was an early speech recognition, so I could finally read it. But it didn't really speed things up very much because you had to go back and change and proof and all. But I did do the total transaction.
Yeah, this is confusing people a little bit.
Oh, this one here. Yeah, but this is the wonderful letter from Papa to grandparents back in Maine. That was a little harder.
It's written on onion paper, so eventually it looks like this, I think.
That letter is on onion skin paper, and as you can tell, it's written, let's leave it up and you can see that every other line is your line, and you just have to read every other line and it makes sense.
And then sides of the paper.
And then you turn it over and read the other side of it, and it's the other line on the other side. But I will say about Nellie's writing that it is pretty legible, and that it was not,
Yeah, it's beautiful,
Not hard.
right?
Yeah.
I'd like to raise this question with you and see if you think it makes sense. You know how much language changes in 20 years. So Nellie was out there for 20 years, and there must have been additions and subtractions to language in that time. She was not in a position to learn the new ones or to replace them with anything new. So she would have missed those. My grandmother was born in 65, so she was going to, and my grandmother was not allowed to be with any more people than Nellie was. So the girls were all treated, both the girls were treated the same. That was good. So when I read that, when I translated that or transcribed Nellie's diary, it seemed to me sometimes that I was listening to my grandmother talk. And I just think that maybe she kept, maybe when she was talking with children, she would go back to something that she would have said as a child, that's possible. But this, it seems so almost impossible and still it seemed real to me.
Yeah.
That I was listening to voices that were
Yeah.
out of, really, really out of the last century, a language that was out of the last century. It was quite pleasant. I liked it. It's time to stop.
Well,
It might be time to see.
do you have a call?
Listen, if you ever are in need, this is the ambulance. line.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.